I came to fix her washing machine, but she told me I shouldn't leave until she was satisfied. It started with a simple phone call. I had just finished my evening coffee, the quiet hum of the city outside my window mingling with the faint scent of roasted beans, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I recognized, my neighbor, a woman I'd known only in passing. She was 42, poised, and always carried herself with an effortless elegance that made me feel slightly awkward whenever we bumped into each other in the hallway. "Hi, I hope it's not too late," she said, her voice soft but tinged with urgency. "My washing machine, it's acting up. Could you possibly take a look?" Even over the phone, there was a subtle warmth to her words. Polite, careful, yet not without a quiet insistence. I hesitated for a moment, aware that I had a few things to finish, but curiosity, and the gentle pull of concern, won over. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. "I can come by in 10 minutes. When I stepped inside her apartment, the first thing I noticed was the subtle, sweet scent of jasmine drifting from a small vase on the kitchen counter. It wasn't overpowering, just enough to hint at her attention to detail. She was there, standing near the washing machine, sleeves rolled up, a look of mild exasperation on her face. Even in that domestic chaos, she moved with quiet grace. The way she shifted her weight, the careful way she reached for a tool, it was like watching someone conduct a delicate dance I wasn't quite part of yet. "Thanks for coming," she said, her tone polite, yet the corners of her lips hinted at something warmer. A relief, maybe, or a subtle curiosity about having me there. She handed me a screwdriver, and our fingers brushed briefly. That fleeting contact sent an odd flutter through my chest, entirely disproportionate to the task at hand. I caught myself noticing the warmth lingering on my skin, a mix of the moment and the quiet intensity in her gaze. As I knelt in front of the machine, she hovered nearby, her movements unhurried but attentive. She offered a towel when my hands got dirty, the edge of her fingers brushing mine again as I took it. It was such a small gesture, but it carried an unspoken intimacy, an acknowledgement of shared space, trust, and an almost imperceptible connection forming between us. We exchanged small talk at first, light and easy. She asked about my day, I asked about hers. But there was an undercurrent, something that neither of us named, but both of us felt. The kind of tension that exists in moments when proximity, touch, and mutual respect collide. And just like that, a simple favor, fixing a washing machine, became the beginning of something quietly significant, a slow burn that neither of us yet fully understood. By the time I had inspected the machine, my attention was divided. Half on the mechanics, half on the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, or the faint tremor in her voice when she admitted she didn't know what she was doing. It was a small, human vulnerability that made her presence feel unexpectedly magnetic. And I knew, even then, that this ordinary evening might turn into something far more memorable than either of us could anticipate. As I crouched in front of the washing machine, twisting wires and checking the motor, I couldn't help but notice the little details around her apartment. It was tidy in a way that spoke of careful thought. Every book on the shelf slightly angled, a small bowl of fresh fruit on the counter, sunlight catching on the polished surfaces. But it wasn't sterile. The place felt lived in, warm, and, somehow, reflective of her personality. Precise yet inviting. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me work. Her gaze wasn't intrusive, but attentive, like she was cataloging every movement I made. The sunlight hit her hair at the perfect angle, illuminating subtle strands of silver that gave her an understated elegance. Even in casual home clothes, a soft sweater and comfortable pants, she radiated a quiet confidence. "What do you think it could be?" she asked softly, her voice breaking my focus for the 100th time. I looked up, caught in the way her eyes held mine for just a fraction longer than necessary. There was curiosity there, yes, but also something warmer. A trust one hadn't expected to earn in such a short time. "Probably just a loose connection," I replied, trying to sound professional, though my hands were slightly trembling from more than just the complexity of the repair. She nodded, taking a small step closer, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something floral and comforting, mingling with the faint metallic smell of the machine. As I reached for a tool, our hands collided again. It was a brief touch, accidental by every measure, yet it sent a quiet current through me. She looked at me, slightly startled, and then smiled, almost shyly. "I'm sorry," she murmured, but there was no awkwardness. Only a shared acknowledgement of the moment, the tension unspoken but palpable. We exchanged light conversation while I worked. A laugh here, a shared glance there. Her humor was subtle, not forced, and it made her feel effortlessly approachable. I found myself noticing more, the gentle curve of her shoulders, the way her lips moved when she spoke, the slight pause before she answered as if weighing her words. She wasn't just beautiful. She carried an aura of life experience that made every gesture and glance feel intentional and meaningful. At one point, she reached over to hand me a screwdriver I hadn't realized she had picked up, and our fingers brushed yet again. This time, I lingered a fraction longer than I intended, and she didn't pull away. The warmth of her hand pressed lightly against mine. A simple touch, yet it sent my mind into overdrive. It was a small, intimate moment, entirely safe, but the electricity was undeniable. By the time the machine was partially disassembled, I realized I wasn't just focused on the repair anymore. I was aware of every subtle movement she made, every smile, every glance. The ordinary act of fixing a washing machine had become a canvas for something more. A slow, delicate tension that neither of us had named, but both of us felt. Even as she offered me a glass of water, her fingers grazing mine once more as I took it, I knew the evening had changed. What started as a simple favor was becoming a space where proximity, curiosity, and quiet attraction intertwined, and neither of us seemed ready to leave it just yet. By the time I was elbow-deep in the washing machine's inner workings, the initial awkwardness between us had begun to dissolve. She moved around the small laundry area with quiet grace, handing me tools or instructions as needed, but never hovering in a way that felt intrusive. Instead, there was a rhythm to our movements, an unspoken choreography that made the space between us feel charged yet comfortable. "You know, I never realized how complicated these things are," she said lightly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The soft movement sent a subtle shiver down my spine, and I caught the faint warmth of her wrist as our hands brushed while reaching for the same wrench. The contact was fleeting, but it lingered in my mind far longer than it should have. I glanced up from the machine and noticed the way the sunlight streamed through her kitchen window, illuminating her features in a way that made her look almost ethereal. The fine lines around her eyes deepened when she laughed, revealing a lifetime of experiences I could only guess at, and yet, there was a softness there that invited trust. I found myself stealing glances, trying to balance professionalism with the inexplicable pull I felt toward her. "Careful with that part," she warned, her voice a gentle note of concern. I looked up and smiled, feeling an odd mix of pride and warmth at the way she relied on my guidance. Her confidence was steady, but there was vulnerability in the way she leaned slightly closer, observing every movement, her hand lightly resting on the counter, fingers flexing in anticipation. When I finally removed a stubborn panel, she offered me a towel for my hands. Our fingers brushed again as I took it, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The simple touch, her skin warm, her grip steady, was enough to send my thoughts spiraling. I realized that this wasn't just about a machine anymore. It was about the quiet intimacy building between us, the kind that doesn't need words. We started talking more, letting small talk evolve into personal anecdotes. She shared stories from her work, from trips she had taken, and from moments in life that had shaped her. I listened, captivated not just by her words but by the subtle expressions that accompanied them. The tilt of her head, the curl of her lips, the way her eyes softened when recalling a happy memory. There was a trust in these moments, a silent permission to see her fully, even in the small domestic chaos of a washing machine repair. At one point, I glanced at her and caught her watching me with a faint smile, a look that lingered just a second too long. My chest tightened, awareness of her presence enveloping me. It was electrifying and grounding all at once, a strange combination of admiration, curiosity, and a budding attraction that neither of us dared to name aloud. By the time the panel clicked back into place, and the machine hummed to life, there was a quiet satisfaction in the air. But more than that, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. We had crossed a threshold. A simple repair had become a space of shared focus, fleeting touches, and subtle, magnetic intimacy. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of something far more profound than either of us could yet articulate. The washing machine hummed smoothly for the first time in days, its rhythmic vibration a quiet testament to my efforts. I stepped back, wiping my hands on a rag, and caught her watching me from across the room. Her expression was unreadable at first, a mixture of relief and something else. Something that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. "You did it?" she said softly, almost reverently. Her voice carried a warmth that felt heavier than the casual compliment it was meant to be. There was a pause, a subtle hesitation, as if she were measuring her next words carefully. Then she added, with a teasing lilt that made me blink in surprise, "You really shouldn't leave until I'm satisfied." I froze for a moment, unsure whether to take her literally or read into the undertone. Her eyes, however, gave the clue. There was a playful glint there, a mixture of challenge and warmth, and the corners of her lips curled into a knowing smile. I cleared my throat, trying to maintain composure, though my pulse had begun to race. Satisfied?" I echoed, half smiling, unsure if I was meant to laugh it off or take the invitation seriously. She tilted her head slightly, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Yes," she said, the words simple but layered. "I mean, would you like to stay for tea?" The invitation was casual, but the weight of it lingered. She moved with that same effortless grace that had captivated me from the moment I entered her apartment. Crossing the room with a measured step, pouring water into a kettle, the steam rising in a gentle curl that filled the air with warmth. I followed her movements, noticing how her sweater fell softly over her frame, how sunlight caught on the edges of her hair, and how her presence seemed to fill the room without trying. She handed me a cup once the tea was ready, and our fingers brushed again. Each time our skin met, I felt a subtle spark, a quiet electricity that seemed to exist between us in these small, human touches. She didn't flinch. She met my gaze, and there was a shared acknowledgement of the moment, unspoken yet clear. We settled on the couch, the cup of tea warming my hands. The scent of jasmine and the faint aroma of her perfume created a comforting atmosphere, intimate without being overwhelming. We started talking lightly at first, sharing trivial details about our day. But soon the conversation deepened. She asked about my family, my work, my dreams, and I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't expected. She listened intently, nodding, occasionally laughing softly, her eyes never leaving mine. There was a magnetic tension in the air, subtle and patient, like a slow tide drawing us closer without either of us rushing. Her shoulder brushed mine as she leaned to reach for the sugar, a touch so casual yet so deliberate that I felt it lingering long after she straightened. By the time I sipped my tea, I realized this wasn't just about fixing a machine anymore. Her invitation, simple, warm, and playful, had transformed the evening. It had created a space where proximity, conversation, and small gestures could quietly intertwine, deepening a connection that neither of us had named, but both of us clearly felt. And in that moment, I understood that leaving now would feel almost impossible. We sank into the couch, the softness of the cushions almost inviting us to forget the outside world. The kettle's gentle whistle had long since faded, leaving only the faint aroma of brewed tea mingling with the lingering scent of her perfume. There was a quiet comfort in being here, in this small living room, sharing space with someone who somehow felt both familiar and entirely new. At first, our conversation was easy. Light jokes, small talk about neighbors and errands, trivial things that made the room feel alive without forcing intimacy. But gradually, the distance between casual and personal began to shrink. She spoke about her work, her tone animated yet thoughtful, revealing the care she put into her life. I listened, fascinated not just by the details, but by the subtle expressions she couldn't quite hide. The soft lift of an eyebrow, the small tilt of her head, the way her eyes sparkled when she recounted something joyful. "You've really been patient with me tonight," she said at one point, handing me another cup of tea. Her fingers brushed mine as I took it, and this time, the touch lingered just a fraction longer than the previous ones. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a quiet acknowledgement of connection that didn't need to be named. She noticed, too. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips. We started to talk about deeper things. Life, regrets, hopes for the future. She shared stories of moments that had shaped her. Joys, disappointments, even small fears she rarely voiced. Her voice carried a vulnerability that felt rare and precious. I responded with my own truths, carefully chosen, aware that these words were building trust, weaving an invisible thread between us. Every now and then, our hands would brush, subtle, accidental, yet deliberate enough to make my heart skip a beat. When she leaned forward to laugh at something I said, her shoulder pressed gently against mine. I felt the warmth of her body, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, and a quiet realization that proximity could be as intimate as words, if not more so. Her eyes held me in a way that made conversation unnecessary at times. A lingering glance, a soft smile, a quiet nod. These were our unspoken words. And yet, it wasn't overwhelming or awkward. It was gentle, patient, and entirely human. A slow recognition of feelings neither of us fully articulated but both deeply felt. As the evening stretched on, I became acutely aware of how safe and alive I felt in her presence. The subtle tension between us, unspoken desire, admiration, curiosity, was tempered by warmth and mutual respect. She wasn't just a beautiful, graceful woman. She was someone who could hold space for me, listen, and make the ordinary extraordinary with her mere presence. By the time the tea was finished, a quiet, profound sense of connection had settled between us. It wasn't rush or urgency that defined the moment, but a steady, patient acknowledgement of something slowly blossoming. The air between us was charged with a delicate energy, one that promised more conversation, more laughter, more touches that lingered just a little too long. And somewhere in that intimate, softly lit living room, I realized that the night had shifted. This wasn't just a favor anymore. This was the beginning of something far more meaningful. By now, the evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, punctuated only by the faint hum of the washing machine still quietly working in the background. The earlier warmth of conversation had shifted into something deeper, a charged calm, a tension that neither of us needed to speak aloud to feel. It was in the way she shifted slightly closer on the couch, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes held mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I was about to rise, my mind telling me it was time to leave, when she caught my gaze. Her look was soft but insistent, a silent question hanging between us. "You don't have to go yet," she said, her voice low, careful, yet somehow daring. I paused, aware of the weight of her words and the delicate pull they carried. There was a moment of silence, thick with unspoken things. My pulse quickened, yet I felt a strange calm, as if the world had shrunk to the small living room, to the space between us. She was closer now, her shoulder brushing against mine, just enough to send warmth radiating through me. Her hand moved slowly, lightly resting on my forearm. It was a touch that was gentle and tentative, yet loaded with meaning. I could feel the quiet steadiness of her presence, the subtle pressure of her fingers, and the way it anchored me in the moment. There was no rush, no demand, just a shared acknowledgement of attraction, trust, and the connection we had been building over the evening. We exchanged a look that held both humor and vulnerability. Her lips curved slightly, not in mockery, but in a soft, inviting smile that made my chest tighten. I wanted to speak, to articulate the strange, potent mix of admiration, desire, and respect I felt, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I simply let myself remain there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, aware of the subtle shifts in her expression, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Every brush of skin, every fleeting glance became a conversation of its own. When she leaned forward to adjust the cushion behind her, her hair fell across my shoulder. I reached out almost instinctively, brushing it back. Our fingers met in the motion, lingering, a silent exchange that spoke louder than anything either of us could have said. Time seemed to slow. The air between us carried an unspoken promise, a tension that was both exhilarating and comforting. This was the moment the slow burn truly ignited, the point where proximity, vulnerability, and mutual recognition of desire coalesced without words, without need for declarations. Finally, she leaned back, her hand retreating, but not entirely. The warmth lingered, as did the intensity of our gaze. There was no need for more. The energy between us had reached its peak, charged but restrained, intimate without crossing boundaries. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized how profoundly this evening had shifted something inside me. It wasn't just about attraction anymore. It was about trust, connection, and the delicate thrill of being seen and appreciated by someone who mattered. The evening had grown quiet. The soft hum of the washing machine had become almost a background lullaby, blending with the faint ticking of the wall clock and the residual warmth of the room. I knew it was time to leave, yet neither of us moved immediately. There was a pause, a moment suspended in comfort and shared awareness, where words felt unnecessary. The connection we had built, through small touches, lingering glances, and intimate conversation, seemed to fill every corner of the room. She stood first, moving toward the doorway with effortless grace, but she glanced back at me over her shoulder. Her eyes held that same gentle spark, a mixture of humor, vulnerability, and something deeper that made my chest tighten. "You know," she said softly, "you can come by any time. I enjoy having you here." The invitation wasn't bold, but it carried a weight that made me pause. It wasn't about expectation. It was about connection, about trust, and about the subtle thrill of being welcomed into someone's life, even for a short while. I nodded, feeling a warmth rise in my chest, and smiled, the corners of my lips betraying the mixture of admiration and anticipation I felt. As I gathered my things, she handed me a small cup of leftover tea. Our fingers brushed lightly, deliberately, and I noticed how her warmth lingered in that simple contact. The quiet hum of the apartment seemed to echo the rhythm of our shared moments, the unspoken understanding between us that this evening had changed something profound. I stepped toward the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. She moved closer, almost imperceptibly, and I felt her presence envelop me for a heartbeat longer. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice low, filled with sincerity, "for letting me stay, and for everything tonight." Her smile deepened, soft and reassuring. "It's not just about fixing the machine," she said gently. "It's nice having someone to talk to, someone who listens." The words struck me more than I expected. I realized that the evening had been as meaningful for her as it had been for me. That subtle bond we had forged, through conversation, trust, and quiet shared moments, was something rare, something I wanted to nurture, even if slowly. Finally, I stepped outside, the door closing softly behind me. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying faint hints of jasmine from her apartment and the distant hum of the city. I walked down the hallway, reflecting on the evening, feeling a pulse of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, understood, and subtly desired in a way that was tender, respectful, and profoundly human. The slow burn of the connection we had ignited was far from over, but tonight had laid its foundation. Small touches, shared laughter, lingering glances, and honest conversation that hinted at what could come next. I glanced back at her door one last time before heading down the stairs, catching a glimpse of her silhouette through the window. She waved, a soft smile lighting her face, and I felt a quiet thrill, the kind that comes from knowing this was only the beginning of something meaningful, something slow and carefully unfolding, a connection that neither of us would forget anytime soon. Sparkles, if you loved this slow burn story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more age gap romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have stayed if you were in his shoes? And turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of our heartwarming, slow-burning stories.